Hello, I'm Femi OK and you're in the stream. Today, married at 10, pregnant by 13. We look at the practice of child marriage and why many are trying to combat it while some are still fighting to preserve it. Our digital producer Malika Bilal is here looking out for your live feedback. This is a really interesting subject, Malika, because not all of our community are on board in terms of child marriage necessarily being able to be stopped. What are they actually saying?
That's a good way to put it. A lot of people are saying it's a no-brainer when it comes to the need to eliminate child marriage, but then there are others that say, well, we have to look at why it happens, and that's almost just as important towards stopping it. The Base9Wario on Twitter says, there's always a time to question what we should learn, the context of why it takes place, and where it will lead to in the future. And of course, for all of you at home, we want your thoughts on that as well, so feel free to join our conversation using the hashtag AJStream.
Joining us in the studio, we have Anne Warner, and Anne is the Senior Gender and Youth Specialist at the International Centre for Research on Women. Welcome to the stream, Anne.
Thank you for having me.
You'll hear more from her in just a little while. Now remember, you can stay in touch with the stream on Facebook. So check out some of the stories we've been covering. You get news updates, behind the scenes, photos, and so much more. So just go to facebook.com/AJStream, which is what I'm doing now, and you will literally be in the stream.
I'm Stuart Newman. I'm a developmental biologist at New York Medical College, and I'm in the stream.
Being forced to become a wife before turning 14 is a reality for many girls that goes beyond religions, cultures and traditions. The United Nations estimates that 39,000 girls become child brides every day. It's often seen as a way to protect the girl's chastity and lessen the family's economic struggles. But studies show that young brides are faced with domestic violence, death during childbirth, and have little chance of staying in school. So, should communities who practice child marriage be allowed to do so, or should it be eliminated altogether? And is ending this tradition even a possibility? Joining us on Skype from Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, is Nana Otto Oyote. She's the Executive Director of the Foundation for Women's Health, Research and Development, and also the organisation is known as Forward. In our Google Plus Hangout from London is Lakshmi Sundaram, Global Coordinator at Girls Not Brides. In Ottawa, Canada is Maria Almasani with MadBack Women's Initiative, and she campaigns for healthcare for child brides suffering from fistula. Welcome to everybody. Maria, let me start with you. At the age of 14, you almost became a child bride. What happened?
When it comes to child brides, in Yemen, it differs from the city and from the village. In the village, it's one less mouth to feed. In the city, usually why they're child brides is that there is a dispute between the father and his wife and he wants to cause pain to his wife. And that's exactly what happened in my case. When we talk about child brides, people think of something abstract as a statistic. It's not a statistic, it's me, it's a person. And how it happened was my father said that I'm going to marry my older cousin in the village who had since finished university, the army, etc. And to a 13-year-old, that sounds like grandpa, although he would be younger than I am today. But, and the other major problem was that I had anemia. In India, I know that anemia is the main cause of maternal mortality. And in Yemen, in the villages, when women give birth, they do not have access to healthcare. So basically, I'm not supposed to be here today. In fact, I'm supposed to be dead.
Can you remember, Maria, when your parents told you that you were about to get married? What did you think? I mean, you were just barely a teenager.
My father told my mother in an argument that he is going to marry me off just to spite her, and then he actually made the arrangements. I told my mother that it's about time. My father was a bit abusive at the time, and I told her, enough is enough. You have to divorce this man. He is becoming more and more violent, and now he's using me to just get back at you. First he hit you, and now and I would beat him back up. But now the major problem was that he decided that he was going to marry me off to someone in the village, and I knew that I would die. So my reaction to my father was no. I beat him up.
Wow. You were some 13-year-old. Maria, I want to bring in Anne into this conversation. And when you talk about child brides, a lot of our online community was saying, well, what do you mean by a child bride? Can you just lay it out for everybody?
Sure. In its very simplest terms, child marriage is when at least one or both spouses are 17 or younger. And this can be in a formal marriage or an informal union. And primarily girls are affected by child marriage. Usually we have younger girls being married to older men.
Well, Femi, it's funny that you asked that question. We actually have a tweet that I've just pulled up here echoing that. Uthman says, I actually don't understand the meaning of child marriage. In which context, Christian or Islam or others? And Nana, I want to go to you with that because I want you to talk about whether or not this transcends religion and culture. I know that you've studied cases in Tanzania, Ethiopia, Sierra Leone. So clearly this is not one uniform thing.
Christians and non-Christians, Muslims, and those who don't worship any of these major religions. What we've seen in Tanzania for this matter is that girls are married immediately. They go through the practice of female genital mutilation, and it could be as early as 12 years. The tradition is that you should be married within a year after you've come out of your female genital mutilation. In Tanzania, you'd find that the situation is that girls could be either Christians or Muslims. They really get married because they want to sort of get children and see themselves as affiliated with a man in order to protect them, in order to support them, and in order to earn an income and see it as a way of running away from poverty. The reality is, in places like Ethiopia, you find that the girls that we work with would tell you that marriage happens primarily because of the issue of virginity.
Right.
And a girl should prove that she's a virgin at marriage. So the earlier you marry a girl, the more likely you will ensure that the girl is a virgin at marriage. Because if she's not a virgin, she's shunned and returned to her family. And it brings shame to the family.
Right.
So these are all linked. And these are the things that really reinforce the different forms of marriages, particularly to younger girls.
So Lakshmi, let's go to Lakshmi. Nana, we'll get back to you. I know we've got slight audio problems, but Lakshmi, that pushback about maybe we should be respecting other people's cultures, even if it involves child marriage.
Well, I think, as Nana pointed out, it's not an issue that's particularly linked to one specific religion, and actually, there's no religion that condones child marriage. That this is a bit of a misconception. Traditions are also made by people, and people can change traditions. They're not set in stone. And as Maria's story very poignantly shows, she didn't decide to run away because of some Western-led agenda. She decided to run away, and she had the courage to run away because it was something that she didn't necessarily want to do. So I think it's really important to talk to the communities themselves and the girls who are being primarily affected by this practice and really try and work from there. I think people who very quickly make this argument that, oh, it's in someone's culture, we shouldn't talk about this issue, they're taking a very simplistic view of the situation.
I have been watching documentaries all weekend about child marriage, and I want to share one with you. The two girls in this documentary are 15 years old. They had to get married very soon. They talk about not being able to complete school, and they also talk about the very sensitive idea of having to have sexual relationships with people who are so much older than they are. Have a listen to this.
Ndagagamizibwa bwatiwa ndiri ndizaga 15. Abambo omwe ndinakwatiwa nawo zaka zawo sindikuzidziwa koma anali akulu ndine ndinali mwana.
Nkamuziwa mwamuna nkafuna kukwatidwa naye Amene nanesikana sinachichireba kumbali nkunana.
Narenga mimba masango takatangasa kwaniye. Namva kubweteka mumtima kuti ndi mimba pachifuwa sikulu ndayimira pamwepo.
And this is heartbreaking. These are, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, these are babies having babies. Why is this not viewed as being paedophilia?
Well, I think that there, until recently, has not been sufficient awareness that this is happening in so many parts of the world, or that there are, as you pointed out earlier, close to 40,000 girls being married each day around the world. And this is part of a system often of poverty and gender inequality, of constrained economic choices, of gender discrimination, where girls and women don't have the same opportunities as men and boys do, and these kinds of situations are simply not brought to light.
Malika.
Well, you know, referencing the question that you asked a little bit earlier, Femi, our community is responding. On Google+, Longkesh says, what right have I, based in Wales, living and educated in the culture and traditions of my birthland, to judge another culture? I don't believe I have any right to impose or instruct another culture how to live. We also have a tweet from Osman who says, the question should be, should we have one universal culture imposed on all of us? And if so, whose? Maria, I want to go to you with that, because I know before our show, you were mentioning your hesitation about speaking out about your ordeal to our producers, saying that there's no black and white answer. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yes, because when we there is a big problem of mission civilisatrice, or civilizing mission. Oh, there's a human rights violation. We must invade Iraq. We must invade Afghanistan. And that's why women and girls like me are afraid to speak, because we don't want our words twisted like that. And it's not, we don't want the fact that in every culture, no culture is perfect. We all have our problems. And we have to fix our problems ourselves. And it's not a universal culture, that is the thing. It's woman-to-woman solidarity. It's beyond any culture. I'm a human being first, beyond any culture. And we have to recognize that humanity is greater than any other principle. And only then, as humanity, we can advance. And there's an Arabic poem that ما أنت مين أنا ما بعرف لكن دموعك قل مين أنت خيي بالإنسانية. I don't know who you are, but your tears tell me who you are. You are my brother in humanity.
Maria, I want to go to Lakshmi, because Lakshmi, you pointed out with Girls Not Brides, child marriages happen all over the world, a lot of developing countries as well, so different cultures, different situations, but there are certain factors that link them all. Can you help us understand what those factors are?
Sure, and I think it's really important to also be clear that a lot of the members of Girls Not Brides are from the communities where they're actually working. They're not coming in from the outside to try and change some fundamental cultural issue. What they're really focused on, and what we're all really focused on, is ensuring that the girls themselves have a choice in what happens in their lives and have the opportunity to thrive and fulfill their potential. It's got nothing to do with imposing a Western culture on communities around the world. So that's one thing I think that's really important to keep in mind. And child marriage itself happens for a whole host of reasons. One that's come up a couple times in the conversation already is because, you know, this is the way things have been done often for generations. But it's also linked to the lack of other opportunities in many communities. Sometimes there are no schools available, no other opportunities for the girls themselves. It may also be because of poverty, when it becomes very difficult for a family to feed all of the children that are there. Maybe linked to insecurity as well, this idea that a girl will be safe if she's married off, and I think that's something of a paradox to really unpack a little bit, that this idea that marriage provides safety for girls. And what people don't realize is that often when they're married, girls can face a huge amount of violence, whether it's physical violence, sexual violence, emotional violence, and it's something that can be very, very difficult for them to actually deal with. This particular point about safety is one that's come up a couple of times more recently. We've seen in areas where there's insecurity, like Mali, in Syrian refugee camps as well, that the incidence of child marriage has been increasing because families are really seeing it as a way, in a sense, to protect the family and to protect the girl.
Right. And if you stand back a little bit and say, okay, so 40,000 young girls every day are getting married around the world, what impact does that actually have on their lives?
It has a tremendous impact on the lives of the individual girls. Their potential, as Lakshmi was just saying, is essentially winnowed down to a very narrow future, where they essentially live a life of domestic servitude. Instead of going to school, instead of playing with friends, instead of having dreams for their lives, they are forced to live away from their families, away from their friends, in a home with their husbands and in-laws usually, where their job is to care for their husbands and in-laws and to have babies. And unfortunately, that means that they're having babies way too young, and the impacts of early pregnancy on young girls can't be overstated. It is simply devastating for the health of young girls to have children before they're physically ready, and then often they're forced to keep having children. And so there are very direct health consequences. They're also not able to participate in the economic or political life of their communities. So they're living these isolated, marginalized lives, and those consequences at the individual level just mount at the community and national level when you have many girls like this in a particular area. Then the consequences for economic development are significant.
Well, Nana, looking towards a solution to all of this, you know, Lakshmi hinted a little earlier about the economic situation that many of these families find themselves in. Our community is picking up on that. Sana says the driving force behind young marriage is economic. In many underdeveloped societies, women are seen as economic burdens. And on Facebook, Catherine says the socioeconomic situation of the families who make the decision to permit a child to be married need to be understood, and that's where change must begin. So it's easy to say eradicate poverty, but how do we actually take steps to change this?
Can I add something on the discussion around poverty and child marriage?
Yes, please do.
For quite a number of the girls that we've been working with in Tanzania, the marriage is arranged without their knowledge. For a lot of the girls, it entails exchange of cows to the fathers, so the fathers tend to benefit from the bride price. And so that makes it a real economic exchange for these girls. When these girls reach their marriage home, very often the violence that they experience is attributed to the fact that the men tell them that they purchased them for so many cows. So a lot of these girls become additionally vulnerable because of this exchange of bride price. For a lot of the girls, when they want to leave the marriage, they are unable to, because when they return to their homes, they are told to go back because the families are not able to return the cows. So for a lot of these girls, their life is made much more miserable as a result of the bride price. And they are forced to live in homes with men who are often much older than them. And the reality for a lot of these girls that we're seeing is that they then have very little options in terms of economic independence, because a lot of them are pulled out of school or hardly go to school. They are not able to acquire the skills, the opportunities, and the networks to enable them attain a livelihood.
So Nana, if our audience are watching this and they're being thoroughly depressed, What do we do about this as an international community? Because this is an international issue. So you've laid out the issues very, very clearly. What do we do?
I think for me, we've just been having a discussion in Tanzania. I'm here because we are organizing a conference, an East African conference on child marriage, to really reflect on what needs to be done at the regional level. And what we're actually seeing that's coming out clear, there is a lack of political commitment. When even the laws are in place, these laws are not implemented because there is a disconnect between the customary laws and the national laws, such that where the girls live, these customary laws prevail. We also realize that, as they said earlier, most of the girls who are affected by child marriage are vulnerable girls living in rural, resource-poor areas. So nobody really thinks about their needs. And it's time we really prioritize the needs of girls in rural areas, particularly child mothers. Development assistance hardly gets to these girls. And I think this is where we need a shift.
That's Nana Otu Oyote. She will be back in the post show at stream.aljazeera.com with Maria Almasani, Lakshmi Sundaram and Anne Warner. But right now, here's Malika with some other stories we're following.
Almost a year after the election that brought Mexico's President Enrique Peña Nieto to power, some of the country's youth are crying SOS. On Saturday, protesters organizing under the banner Mexico SOS clashed with police inside a Mexico City metro station. Activists plan to occupy the president's official residence to express frustration with the government's handling of poverty and corruption. The protest kicked off a month of action called Operation Disobedience, and one of the group's projects is this: a map where citizens can submit anonymous reports of corruption, violence, and disappearances. We turn now to Jordan, where more than 200 news sites vanished from the web over the weekend. They were blocked when they failed to comply with a new law that requires Jordanian news sites to register with the government press department. The blog Hibber obtained and published a full list of the sites that went dark. The Jordanians are calling it censorship, and they, like Ibrahim Awais, who suggested we cover this story, are going online to speak out. And our last lead in Turkey. Anti-government protests are spreading across the country, but residents say local media isn't keeping up. Hundreds gathered outside headquarters of the channel NTV to criticize the network's coverage of the demonstrations, which started in Istanbul's Taksim Square. Criticism of Turkish television wasn't limited to NTV. This photo showing CNN Turk on the left airing a documentary about penguins, while CNN International covers the protests, summarize the criticisms of many. Grihaz writes, "Please help. Istanbul needs media coverage. Turkish media has been sold out." We'll take a closer look at what's behind the protests on Tuesday's show, so tweet us your thoughts. Femi?
So when I left work on Friday, we were not doing turkey on Tuesday. Explain how we make the sausage here at the Stream, because we changed completely the show idea.
It definitely makes for an interesting day at the Stream, but we saw this kicking off online and realized we couldn't ignore it. It's a very Stream type story.
So we will be meeting some of the protesters who've been protesting in Turkey and asking them what they're so angry about. That's on the next AJ Stream. But right now you can catch us on stream.aljazeera.com. That is where the post show will be on child marriage. We will see you online. Hello again, this is the Stream's online post show, and we're talking about child marriage and what's being done to end the phenomenon. Let's get back to the conversation. I want to show you something I've got back here on my computer, which is, I'm going to call it the marriage map. Basically where you see blue or dark blue or light blue, these are many of the places around the world where child marriage actually exists as a practice. And all of the guests, in between that, I don't know, it's like 20 seconds between the main show and then the post show, they all said, we want to talk about solutions more. And let's start with you. I think we spent a really good amount of time just explaining what the issues are. And child marriage has been around for a very, very long time, pretty much forever. How do you tackle something that's been around forever?
Well, it's been around in many countries around the world. The United States, Western Europe, the age of marriage has gone up in many countries around the world. The pace of change is too slow, though, in many parts of the world. And however, there's a lot that's being done to tackle the issue by communities around the world. And many of these efforts really are locally owned and locally led. They're being led by community leaders, by religious leaders, by concerned parents. But what we can do is, first of all, start with the girls. Start with the girls who are most at risk of child marriage and give them a chance to be educated. Even if it's not in formal schools, if that's not an option, teach them life skills, practical things like how to open a bank account, how to mail a letter, information about their own health. It's amazing what these kinds of small group settings can do to actually delay the age of marriage. ICRW has done a lot of research tracking these kinds of programs over time and has shown that you can see a change in knowledge, attitudes, and behavior related to marriage when you mobilize girls who are at risk of child marriage and bring their parents and community members along with that process.
So you say that, so give me an example.
Sure. In India, for example, there's a program that worked with adolescent unmarried girls, bringing them together over the course of a year, teaching them life skills and very basic things. After 1 year, the average age of marriage in that community increased from 16 to 17. This was compared to no change in a nearby village that was comparable, that didn't have any similar program. There are programs like this around the world, in Ethiopia and Bangladesh, in Kenya and Tanzania. There's a lot that's happening that we can build on.
Lakshmi, I was at the United Nations on Friday, and one of their plans going forward from 2015 was actually to eradicate child marriage. So it's certainly in their thought for how they want to go forward in a developing world and the developed world. What would you add to that?
Well, I think, first of all, that it's absolutely fantastic that this high-level panel has really first taken into account the issue of child marriage and has recognized that if we do bring together the political will, the types of programs that Anne mentioned and others, and the support from communities and the girls themselves, that you can actually bring an end to child marriage. It's something that, you know, as you mentioned before, you asked the question about changing traditions, changing something that's been around for so long. Child marriage is something where change may be slow at the beginning, but when it starts, it will go very quickly. And once you have a situation where girls are allowed to become women before they make choices about getting married, they're very unlikely to marry off their own daughters. So it is actually possible to bring an end to this completely. What we need to do, as Anne said, is work with the girls, work with communities, work with religious leaders, but also make sure that we're changing some of the choices that have been plaguing, or the lack of choices, pardon me, that have been plaguing many families. So making sure that girls do have access to education, making sure that education is safe. I mean, one of our members has been working in Rajasthan in India on making sure that schools have separate toilets for girls. I mean, it sounds really simple, but it's something that will actually mean that girls will be safer in the school environment and will make parents more likely to send their girls to school. So it's really making sure that there's a range of factors that are addressed and that make it possible for parents who don't want necessarily to marry off their daughters to have other choices around. And then finally, of course, making sure that the laws are in place, as Nana said before, that there aren't loopholes that are linked to customary law, and that the communities and the girls themselves are aware that these laws exist, and that even law enforcement officers know that these laws exist, and that it's part of their job to make sure that they're they're enforced. It's really making sure that all of the pieces of the puzzle are in place so that we can actually bring an end to this practice.
Well, Maria, I'd like you to pick up on what Lakshmi just said about laws. We have a video comment here with someone who has a solution. Have a listen.
Communities that practice child marriage need to stop because they are victimizing and hurting young, vulnerable children. It is even time to ask, in what sense are these practices traditional? Child marriages often occur in poor rural households for economic purposes, using tradition as justification. I don't need to get into the obvious horrific consequences of this practice, but one of the steps that can be taken to stop it is for countries to raise the legal minimum age of marriage for girls.
So Maria, what are your thoughts on that? Because also, as we've heard, even in places where there is a minimum age for marriage, people still get around it.
Yeah, we forget two things. First of all, one thing that we forgot to mention is many of these girls don't make it. A lot of them die due to lack of medical care and due to the fact that their bodies cannot hold the wedding night, basically. They get ripped inside. And fistula, and there are many other health consequences, which is what Matbach works with the Borma Fistula Hospital in Somalia. But the other issue is men. We forget men. And men in villages are ignorant. There is no man who would have wanted to marry me at 14 in the city, because they want an educated woman who can take care of the kids, and so that the kids, when they get sick, she knows what to do with them and be a good mother. Whereas in the village, they think the younger the better because the men are uneducated. In Yemen, when they educated the men, a lot of men broke off engagements with child brides, and a lot of them broke off the engagements of their own daughters. So teaching men how the anatomy works and how it's a lower quality bride. Men are into status symbols like buying an iPhone, and you show them that the iPhone equivalent is the 20-year-old or 18-year-old girl who has the education, she can take care of your kids, and this 8-year-old, 10-year-old, she will not be a good wife for you. She's too young, has actually had a huge impact. So we have to, working on the demand side, as you were all talking about, is good, but we also have to talk about, talking about the supply side, as you've all mentioned, is excellent, but we also have to talk about the demand and men. Both sides of the equation to be addressed.
I just want to ask all of our guests very swiftly, just to give us a sense of how they feel the next 50 years will pan out for child brides and child marriages. I just want to get your very quick assessment. We don't have time for a huge conversation. You can't pick up on other people's points, but just I want to know how hopeful are you? Just very quickly, the same way that we started the pre-show. Anne.
Well, I'll tell you, the fact that we're talking about this issue on the program today makes me very hopeful, and the fact that there's been so much increased attention to the issue over the last few years. However, we have to do more, because if we don't stop talking or keep talking but start acting and investing more, we know that in the next decade there'll be 140 million more brides. Multiply that by 5 and we'll see what happens in the next 50 years. But I think that we really can start to turn the tide if we act now, if we take this issue seriously, if we invest in girls starting today.
Lakshmi from Girls Not Brides, we're going to end with you because unfortunately we're out of time here for the show, but I really wanted to ask you, the next 50 years, how hopeful are you?
I'm really hopeful. I think there's a lot more attention on this issue than there has been so far. We know what the different pieces that we need to address are. As Maria said, it's also engaging men, it's engaging families, it's engaging communities, and making sure that the international community is behind this. And yeah, I think we can end child marriage, and that in 50 years, this will be a relic of the past.
We won't have this stream conversation in 50 years, but right now, Malika Bilal, what's a closing comment or closing feeling that you're getting from our online community?
Well, this one is echoed among a lot of people, but this is a good sum up. Religions and cultures should be respected, but this doesn't mean that basic human rights should be violated.
Thank you very much to all of our guests. Anne Warner with the International Centre for Research on Women, Nana Oto-Oyote with Forward UK, Lakshmi Sundaram with Girls Not Brides, Maria Almasani with Matbach Women's Initiative. And now on the next AJ stream, What are Turkey's demonstrators feeling so angry about? We will have some of the protesters on the stream tomorrow and you can find out for yourself. In the meantime, you know where to find us. We will be online. Thanks for watching.